Sabrina 70s comic issue 3. The story starts out with Harvey driving his car with Sabrina in it, and Sabrina screams and tells him to watch out for a tree that almost fell on them. Harvey wastes time trying to budge the thing, and he complains that the road is blocked and they can't get by, so they're stuck here in the rain. And Sabrina complains that she's getting drenched because the car's open. Where were they driving to? I wish I knew where the drive before them took them to and where they were headed. Sabrina wants to go somewhere to get out of the storm, and he points out an old house over there, seeing a light on from the window. Is this gonna backfire on them? Because Harvey was being useful, and this seems like it's leading up to an old cliche. Sabrina agrees out of desperation, and he runs towards the house holding her hand. I love that Sabrina explains that they had picked today to go on a picnic, so that's why they're going out. Sabrina complains about it being a musty old mansion, and Harvey knocks on the door. And the owner of the house is clearly not a normal mortal with pointy ears, which was foreshadowed by people pointing out that the house is old and them needing to stay there. Seems cliche. It'd actually be more of a twist if it was just a normal house that helped them. Harvey explains the situation and asks to use his phone to get some help. He says that the phones aren't working, and he tells them it'd be wise for them to leave. Why can't he just help them? He seems forced. They seem to be in real danger, aside from their plot armor anyways, because we see a lightning bolt hit the ground near them. Harvey wonders where not Dracula went. They go into the room with the light on and see a coffin, which opens by itself and has nothing in it. There's a slam sound, and Sabrina screams because she thinks someone shut the front door. Is there going to be a subversion where it turns out they were wrong? Harvey says that maybe the old man's back, and it turns out the door's closed and no one's around anywhere. I'm confused. This is Earth. Sabrina says that maybe the wind shut it. They hear some laughter, and Harvey thinks the old man's trying to scare them. I mean, he probably is. This old man came out of nowhere. Sure, witches can exist in this world. Vampires make just as much sense. That's what Wizards of Waverly Place went with. But still, it's a bit confusing. Harvey acts brave and tells him to come out from behind that curtain. And they scream at seeing a skeleton standing up. Was this released around Halloween? That would have explained the previous story. Is the old man a witch who just really doesn't want to help them for no reason? It makes sense if there's a thought bubble from him explaining that he doesn't want to help mortals. The story's tense, but it's too confusing for me to take seriously. Finally, Sabrina thinks to use a spell to get rid of the tree on the road. Harvey's naturally confused that it's gone, and Sabrina doesn't even try to give an explanation, like a lumberjack passing by and getting rid of it. I always wondered why she didn't just do this in the first place, because she could have easily done that and then erased his memory of seeing the tree. So the whole story wouldn't have happened. Then some headlights tell them to stay where they are when they didn't do anything wrong, and a cop asks what they're doing in a storm like this. I didn't think that was illegal. Why is he harassing them? Harvey tells him the truth, and I guess he won't believe him. The cop says that house has been boarded up for the past 20 years, and tells them to go home before they run them in, justifying that their parents are probably worried about them. And just like that, the story ends with me just confused about why that guy was messing with them. That doesn't feel like a full story, because it didn't explain that, so I can't take it seriously at all. Then the second story, Sabrina tells Hilda that she won't be long and just wants to lend some history notes to Moose, who has stars around his head as if he's under a spell. Why wouldn't she just get the notes with him staying outside her door? She must be pretty compassionate to help someone who's clearly going to be hopeless at school. Hilda has an interjection in her thoughts that mentions the name Satan, so that was jarring. She doesn't like Moose because she thinks he's a house wrecker. And she's right because his elbow hits a lamp and somehow he falls onto the little table. And Hilda thinks he gets faster every time. So shouldn't Sabrina have known this and been smart enough to keep him out of her house? Why won't she get punished for this? Hilda sure does love her. Why isn't Harvey being used for this? He's the clumsy one, apparently. Then he knocks over a flower pot too while trying to apologize. No one would say duh. He should have just said Hilda wants to turn Moose into something. Never mind that people would get suspicious of Sabrina because she would be the last person he was seen with. But I guess memory erasing would protect her anyways. As Ambrose tells her to calm down, Hilda says that she should order a new book of spells because it's falling apart. First, Ambrose tells her not to be too hard on Moose, and then he says he doesn't like to interrupt her evil doings. I guess he's lying out of cowardice. Why isn't Sabrina being called out on for bringing him into her house? She really has a soft spot for her. Hilda says happily that if she turned him into a bird, he'd fly south. And she's told something's burning. She gets worried about her beautiful devil's food cake in the oven. And I wonder why Moose is picking up a bust. She tells him to make himself comfy and he causes even more damage. It's interesting to have an accidental villain. But why didn't she just tell him to leave? He realizes he ruined an old book and wants to try to put it back together before Hilda would show up. He doesn't put the pages back in the right order. He runs off, and when Sabrina shows up in front of him, he slides into Hilda. Hilda wastes time saying a spell instead of just instantly zapping him and turning him into an animal, like a bird. That sure is convenient for Moose, who had no business being in her house in the first place. She says a spell that doesn't sound familiar. There's a zap, and Ambrose tells Sabrina to send Moose home and give him a hint. If he's her cousin, and a cousin is the son of your aunt or uncle, then either Sabrina has more aunts than we know, she has some uncles, or aunts must have had children. That's at least unique, but I'd rather focus on Sabrina. Not a billion other relatives of hers that won't get enough development anyways. Ambrose doesn't seem very interesting or necessary so far. I think there's a reason he wasn't in the sitcom. I think they thought it was too confusing that he was even living with them because he was just a cousin of theirs. He tells her that all the pages in the magic book are out of place. And Sabrina complains that it'll take all night to put them in the proper order before she could work on an antidote for that spell. We see that Hilda somehow accidentally turned herself into a seal with a human face. The spell she was saying didn't make any sort of hint that it was leading to this result. So there's no reason she would have visualized to this. And I don't even know how her magic knew how to interpret that spell because it gave no hint about what would happen next. So that didn't make any sense. Why would they need the magic book instead of just imagining her as back to normal? I didn't want Moose to get punished for an accident. But Sabrina should have known better than to let him into the house. And she doesn't get punished either. Instead, Hilda does for naturally wanting to punish him for damaging her house. Was it too hard for her to cast a spell on him to make him not clumsy anymore? I guess it's too hard to visualize, so it's impossible. But isn't that what saying spells is for? I guess she was too mad and just wanted revenge, so naturally she wouldn't have felt like focusing on improving him. But Ambrose could have been helpful by suggesting that she improve him instead, because he wasn't in a bad mood. He could have written a spell. But the problem is that spells have to rhyme, so they probably didn't have time to focus on making one up. But all of the witches we've seen so far never have any problem with coming up with perfect rhyming spells on the spot, one after the other. Anyways, why doesn't Sabrina just point to Hilda and instantly return her to normal? How would anyone think she has to use the magic book for that? She can visualize Hilda just fine. Then in another story, Hilda sees a grumpy man as she's walking around at night, fortunately wearing a hat that's a different color from her dress this time. It looks nice. She tells the cop that a man's following her and must be crazy. And the story ends with him saying, "I agree." And then he doesn't proceed to tell him to leave her alone because the story's already over. That was pointless. It's not like he was into her because he looked grumpy. But I guess it was funny. I get the joke. I'm just wondering why Hilda bothered to ask the cop for help. She's a witch. In the next story, Sabrina looks out the window at Archie and feels sorry for him, lampshading that Veronica treats him badly. Hilda just laughs and says that she'd make a good witch. Wouldn't she just want to make Veronica nice to Archie? The story drags on, repeating itself when I got it already. The story would be more convincing if we actually saw Veronica mistreating Archie. But instead, the only reason I'm in favor of Sabrina intervening is because I saw the previous story with her, where she refused to date him because he's bad at basketball. When I was reading out the script, I imagined that the comic was showing us Veronica treat him badly, but that would have made sense. After she inexplicably puts out her hand to tell Archie off, Sabrina thanks her spell and casts it with both hands for once. And surrounds Archie with a bunch of girls summoned to love him. I guess she brainwashed them. She created human beings just to magically zap them away. She could have just cheered him up with magic. But I guess she figured that would be brainwashing. Or didn't think of it. He calls her fellas, and because of that, for some reason, she immediately gets rid of them with magic, saying that that was a bad idea. I guess she was also against brainwashing him into not liking Veronica anymore. That's what the spell made me think she was gonna do at first. It would have gotten his mind off her. Instead, he inexplicably tells a bunch of pretty girls to leave him alone. Veronica asks where those girls she saw went, and when he shows his loyalty to her, she insults him instead of appreciating it, calling him an insult I don't even recognize. She'd look smarter if she called him out on the fact that if he only had eyes for her, he wouldn't be dating Betty, or Cheryl. That would kinda explain why she treats him so badly, because she knows he's not just in love with her, and she could know that he's just using her for wealth, on some level. But she never even says that. Or maybe she did. But we don't even see her say that. Sabrina wonders why she didn't think of it before, and decides to make Archie irresistible to Veronica, which must have been the case already if she ever dated him at all, but she just wants to make it even better. So first she was trying to make things better, and now she's gonna screw over Betty. Or not, because Betty would just get a boyfriend who isn't a loser. Or not if she never gets over Archie. It makes sense that Sabrina isn't considering Betty because she's not there at the moment. Either way, I'm sad at seeing Sabrina try to change the status quo of Archie when I know that I'd never be allowed to actually stick, because then the series wouldn't be going by its original premise anymore. It's not like it's full of really strong, lovable three-dimensional characters. Though I've barely revisited it so far, it just seems like Archie's a loser who would be a smug jerk if he was a winner. Betty's nice, but is sabotaged by her terrible taste in men. And Reggie and Veronica are just unlikable jerks. But you'd think that Sabrina would be allowed by the writers to permanently change the status quo of Archie, because it's not the Archie comic, so she can do whatever she wants to them. Sabrina wonders how that incantation goes, not having confidence in her ability to just come up with a new pair of rhymes to cast a spell anyways, when she's always good at that. Or simply imagine Veronica as being infatuated with Archie, which you've seen before. She knows how to make Archie infatuated with her, and she didn't even need to say an incantation. And of course, the entire time, the story's been making Sabrina an anti-hero at best because she has no problem trying to intervene in Archie's love life with her magic. You'd think this would be illegal for witches. But I guess the spy witches don't care about mortals when it comes to this, and all they care about is the masquerade, because the old witches are fine with scaring mortals. It's not like she's planning on making Archie love her after all. She's just being a well-intentioned extremist. Then someone tells Sabrina that Hilda called to see if she was here and wants her to call her back. Sabrina thanks him, and Hilda tells her to pick up some coffee on her way home. She agrees, as I wonder why Hilda and all her experience with magic can't just remember the taste of coffee and zap it up herself. Then Sabrina tells Hilda that she's got an idea for Archie, the charm chant, and she's asked which one. I was surprised that she told Hilda this, when she should probably be more wary about telling her parental figures she's interfering with a mortal life this way, especially in a way that is trying to help them. I guess she just likes and trusts her that much. Hilda's no stranger to abusing magic either. Why would she discipline her for it? Sabrina says she's going to use a simple spell, and she says it out loud. Right away, the doorbell rings, and a bunch of men, including the milkman, fall in love with Hilda and go to her, as she just flattered. Not even caring that Sabrina just brainwashed them into this. She must have done this on purpose, because I don't see how this would be an accident. But wouldn't it be more likely that she would have just pictured Archie and Veronica when saying that spell? We cut to Sabrina's spell on Veronica working, as Veronica jumps into him and tells him to kiss her, while still calling him a fool. Sabrina says that now she could go home happy. She then realizes that she hit Hilda with a spell over the phone, so she did it by accident, somehow. I guess because she was thinking about Hilda when saying the spell just because she was talking to her. I guess that makes sense. She uses the spell to undo the spell, and I'm guessing that somehow undid the spell on Veronica too. Instead it ends with the men being unbrainwashed and just insulting her appearance as she calls Sabrina a spoilsport because she was so desperate for boyfriends that she was fine with the idea of them being only brainwashed to like her. It's surprising how dark and edgy this comic is sometimes. You'd think Sabrina would get in trouble with the Witches' Coven for this, but I guess not because it was just an accident. And her spell on Veronica did nothing but make two people happy. I guess Hilda's against brainwashing the men herself. I mean, you'd think if she was fine with men only being brainwashed into liking her, then she would have used brainwashing to get a boyfriend already. In the next story, Jughead tells Archie in front of Sabrina that a kid's swiping the hubcaps right off their car, in broad daylight even. It's interesting to see what their car looks like. It's going to be interesting to read a comic that was released in the early 70s. Now I'll get to see what that decade was actually like for people instead of just seeing disco and hippies get made fun of. So that'll be worth putting up with the occasional slang and fashion. Archie and Jughead go chase the kid, giving us a bunch of panels without Sabrina, and finally Sabrina catches up with them. And the scared kid explains that he doesn't like to steal, but his father is sick and out of work, so he wanted to get his family some money. That's nuanced writing. What if he's lying though? But it would be an impressive, sympathetic explanation instead of just sticking with the obvious assumption that he's a thug. Archie asks what he's going to do with the money, when I thought it was obvious he was going to give it to his parents so they could spend it. He says he wants to buy milk and bread to feed his siblings. Never mind the fact that his parents would obviously want to know where he got the money from and he might get in trouble. So he didn't think ahead. I guess he plans on literally going to buy it himself, but I don't think a grocery store would let a little kid buy milk and bread, would it? Wouldn't it just ask where his parents are? Surprisingly, Jughead's smart enough to accuse him of lying. Archie's smart enough to say he'll go see if he's telling the truth or not. And Sabrina still says nothing, which has kind of started to grate on me already, that there's a lot of times where there's a long time where Sabrina doesn't say anything. So far this comic has had basically no focus on the high school they go to. But it's more interesting to have different settings instead. The high school setting can be overused after all, but if we never see her in it, it comes off like she's never there. Sabrina believes the kid, and he says he doesn't want to be taken to his parents because he'd get in trouble. He says that he always tells his parents that someone gives him the food or money he brings home. That's smart of him. Archie lectures him, and he runs away from them out of desperation and trips and falls, losing a tooth. That's really unlucky. Jughead feels sorry for him, and Sabrina fortunately points out that it was his fault for running away. Archie tells him that stealing all the time would just get him in trouble. Isn't that obvious? Is this story just there to tell this moral to anyone in his situation? Sabrina reasons with him that if he got put away, he couldn't be any help to his parents. She finds his tooth and tells him to hold it and make a wish to the tooth fairy for the shoeshine box he wants. He's smart enough to not believe in the tooth fairy because he's poor, so he never got any tooth fairy money. Jughead thinks she's gone bananas. At least that line was amusing. She uses her magic to conjure up a shoebox behind a tree as even Archie laughs at her. So I guess it's canon that he's a jerk even without an ego boost. She gives him a box with brushes and polish. And he's also smart enough to guess that one of them put it back there when his eyes were closed. Which is kind of true. He already has high hopes of becoming a money-making businessman, wanting to go home. And conveniently now he agrees to go on a ride with Archie there. Archie says he's not going to tell his parents he stole his hubcaps if he never steals again. I assume the story will have a happy ending. And if so, it'll definitely be nice to see Sabrina's magic not backfire if she does a good deed with it. This kind of thing should happen a lot more often. It establishes that her existing is good for the world. Better than her first story did. I have to wonder why the guys don't immediately assume that Sabrina put the box there. It's satisfying to see the kid's mother thank them. And she was smart enough to actually worry that he was stealing earlier. And the predictable dialogue continues until they're finally out of the house. Jughead says that the school of hard knocks sometimes turns out the most solid citizens because if you ever had to do without things when you were young, you'd really appreciate them later. He wishes everyone was like that. And the car doesn't start because someone stole the car battery. They just had to have the downer ending after that uplifting good deed. But at least it's not at the expense of that kid. Jughead makes a joke even at a time like this, saying, "It's very simple, Archie. I'll knock out your tooth, and we wish for a new battery from the tooth fairy." I wish we saw them get it, and then saw Sabrina erase their memory after they figure out it's her. The first story is about Harvey and Sabrina getting stranded in a storm when a tree falls and blocks their car, and because Sabrina's too lazy to just magically get rid of the tree and erase Harvey's memory, I guess, the rest of the plot happens, where they go to an old house with a vampire in it. And for some reason he refuses to give them a phone to call their parents. That was just confusing because the villain had no motive. The story was trying to be tense and menacing, but the whole time I was just confused because they didn't know why the villain was acting that way. Shouldn't Sabrina have used... I guess she believed him about his excuse not to help them, so that's why she didn't brainwash him. In the second story, Sabrina doesn't get punished for stupidly bringing Moose into her house when he's a known klutz. so he damages their furniture, not learning to stay still after the first time. And Hilda's thwarted in her attempts to give him any comeuppance because she says a spell and somehow gets turned into a seal. That wouldn't happen. In the third story, Sabrina feels sorry for Archie and uses magic to try to improve its situation with Veronica. Surprisingly, the story doesn't end with the status quo reverting back to normal, even though it probably will. I guess the spell was inexplicably temporary, or Sabrina felt guilty about brainwashing Veronica, but we should have seen that. Archie's been shown to be fine with cheating on Veronica at every opportunity, so why did he tell a bunch of girls to leave him alone? I mean, he's girl crazy, so that seemed out of character immediately. Apparently Sabrina thought it'd be wrong to brainwash Archie into taking his mind off Veronica, but making Veronica love him was fine. The final story is there to moralize about what's wrong with stealing for your poor family by using a new kid who tried to steal Archie's hubcaps. I was impressed that it actually gave him an excuse for stealing, meaning that the moral was written properly by really considering both sides of the story. It wasn't just manic saying that stealing is wrong to a bunch of orphans on the street. Finally, after the predictable happens, Sabrina used magic to summon a shoes shining box for him to make money legitimately, calling herself the Tooth Fairy. And the kid was impressively smart enough to realize it was one of them who gave it to him, though he doesn't explain why he thought they had a shoe shining box hidden near him before they'd even know him. I guess they thought it was a coincidence that they already had it. The plot felt pretty slow-paced for how predictable and mundane it was. Aside from Sabrina's magic, this story could be done in anything, so it would have been better if there were less panels in it so we could cut to her using magic earlier. The story had no business not ending right after they were thanked by his mom, but I guess they thought it would be too sappy to end it there.